recommendation is build to EU AI Act standards. That's the most demanding codified regime. So build to that standard, you have covered the global floor. But as Anindya mentioned, don't mistake EU compliance for global compliance. It is a floor for universal principles. It is not a floor for region specifics.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on the AI Governance Podcast. I'm Matt McCallum, and today I'm joined by two guests who have written together on what enterprise AI governance actually looks like in practice, across the strategic, the technical, the ethical, and the legal. Their AI Governance Handbook was published in August 2025, and they're already deep into a follow-up. Dr. Anindya Sircar spent more than 2 decades running intellectual property at Biocon and Infosys before moving into academic work. He's now IPR Chair at NALSAR University of Law in Hyderabad, where he teaches at the intersection of IP, technology, and policy. Anindya, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Matt. Glad to join this program.
No, we appreciate it. And Sunil Gregory is at Cognizant, where he works with Fortune 500 enterprises on AI governance, the strategic and framework level work enterprises wrestle with as they figure out how to bring AI under control.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you for inviting us for this podcast.
Thank you, Sunil. So the handbook the two of you wrote is structured around 4 guardrails, the strategic, technical and operational, ethical and legal and regulatory. And I want to get into how that frame holds up against everything that's happened, even in the 8 months since you went to press. But before we get into the substance, if you don't mind, we'll start with something a little lighter. So you've known each other for more than 20 years, but the writing partnership for the book is rather more recent. How did the labour actually divide between the two of you? And was there a moment in writing where one of you pulled a chapter in a direction the other maybe wouldn't have gone on alone?
Well, Matt, I think what made this partnership work was, and what also made to the success of this book, is that Sunil and I never confused familiarity with agreement.
Okay.
We have known each other for nearly 2 decades, worked together on projects both in corporate environment, in academic settings, and that built up a kind of trust where you can tell someone, comment on their argument if it's wrong, without it becoming a conversation which is about the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
The trust created a particular kind of freedom. The research and the writing part, if I have to say, weren't divided purely on the lines of who knew what, although that mattered, but also along the lines on who cared most about a given question.
Yes,
sometimes those overlapped, sometimes they didn't. And when they didn't, the chapter usually got more and more interesting.
Excellent. Okay. So did you find yourself having to defend positions when you didn't expect to at any point, Sunil, or how did that work out in practice?
That was a very, very on ignorable accounts. That was not much of a point.
What I would say, I want to add to what Dr. Sircar mentioned. So we used to collaborate a lot when he was leading the IP cell for my previous company, and I used to lead the strategy for the product division there. So the initial conversations we had was primarily around me going to him, trying to navigate the IP challenges, etc., etc. So we come up from 2 different backgrounds. He come from the legal academic background, and I come from the practical background. We build stuff. So how do I navigate it? And if I can ease out some of the legal requirements, how do I do it? These are some of the challenges that I started off with. Somewhere in the journey, he encouraged me to consider graduate studies. So even though he was not my first guide, in a way, he was practically my guide for my graduate studies too. So when we were writing the book, both of us were coming from 2 different perspectives. My lens was primarily from the practical side. How does decisions get made in corporates? The messy, the political, the resource constrained environment, and how can you navigate that? And Anindya would put that into a doctrinal framework, into an institutional framework, which actually gave a hue and weight to the book. So yes, there were moments when we were at 2 different points, and that I would say more was on concepts like how prescriptive the book should be. I, coming from strategy and execution, prefer to be direct, to be prescriptive, whereas the academician that Dr. Sarkar is, he wanted me to hold back. Many a times he preferred ambiguity and said, look, let it sit with the reader, let the tension build up, because that would come with clarity eventually. So, as at the end of it, I think his restraint really worked well for the book, but those were the times when we had differences in the approach that we had.
No, perfect. It sounds like a brilliant balance. I think that comes through.
If I would like to say, in throughout the program, the autonomy survived. Okay.
Good. Okay.
And we didn't stand down on each other or a single voice. And if you really read the book closely, you must still find two minds in the book.
Yes.
Correct.
And I mean that, I take that as a compliment for both of us.
No, absolutely. Room for both voices and both positions and backgrounds. Excellent. And I mean, so if I take that as an entry point into the book itself, so it's structured, I said at the top, around 4 guardrails: the strategic, technical and operational, ethical, and then legal and regulatory. So for a reader who's maybe just been handed responsibility for AI governance at their company, and they're opening the book for the first time, where would you tell them to start? Why?
My honest answer would be don't start in chapter number 1.
Okay.
Because we give an introduction. So for somebody who is handed over the responsibility for AI governance, I'm assuming that person, he or she would be a practitioner, would know the background of it. So definitely doesn't need to spend time on chapter number 1, 2, which introduces the subject. But I would strongly recommend them to start on chapter number 3, which introduces the guardrails and also introduces the topic, what is AI for your organization? Sometimes we miss the forest for the woods. And as we go deeper into the subject, we will understand that. In fact, unless you answer that question, the rest of it, the ethical frameworks, seems very abstract, and the so-called regulatory checklist can be very, very arbitrary. So we are kind of in a pre-regulatory era. There are multiple regulatory frameworks being discussed. There are different jurisdictions pulling in different directions. But this is actually a window of opportunity for companies. So if the companies can use this time to build a principled internal governance framework, that can help them take a lead when the regulation actually crystallizes and settles down. So our opinion is start with the 3rd chapter and focus on 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if you get some extra time, come back and get the history and the basics of why we started this conversation.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. And I have to check because I've got you both on. I assume, Anindya, you would start in the same place, or you would say the same thing?
I would also largely agree with Sunil, but let me add a small navigational note. The first 2 chapters give you the philosophical and the regulatory backdrop. Why governance is hard. What's different? What are the different jurisdictions doing? And what are the regulation, self-regulation, and attempts which have been made? See, the context matters, but if you are under the pressure of the Monday morning, you can always return to it sometime later.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. I love that. And well, as you say, that's the practitioner's reality, isn't it? That is having that Monday morning. Sunil, so your view of the current enterprise picture is that CIOs opened the door to AI experimentation, and now they're dealing with shadow IT all over again, plus a compute budget that's already exhausted on pilots that haven't graduated. What's the structural fix that you walk clients through when they're in that state? And how is it different from how organizations finally got shadow IT under control over the last 10 years?
Good question, Matt. Let's start with the diagnosis first. See, when we speak to different CIOs, all of them know that there is a problem that exists, but they haven't put their finger exactly on what the problem is. And the term that you used, shadow AI everywhere, that's a reality that is coming. If you look at it, if you read the newspaper reports, now multiple CIOs are reporting that they've already exhausted their AI budget. There was a recent report where the Uber CTO mentioned that his budget for the entire year got blown away by the first quarter, and that's a reality. And if you look at many of these organizations, most of these programs are still in the purgatory of experimentation. I wouldn't say all, most of the AI programs are still in the POC phase, still in purgatory. They haven't gone to heaven. And I would say it's a structural problem, not an execution problem. A lot of people consider that as an execution problem, but it's actually a structural problem. When AI got introduced into the mainstream language, let's say a couple of years back, the common lingo was, look, AI is going to take your job away. Everybody has to jump into the AI bandwagon. And it literally happened that way. So it led to the wild, wild west once again. And it actually opened up the doors to proliferation. So it went all over the place. There was no accountability, there was no economics, there was no shared economics, there was no plan. So it started, and the results were predictable. Today, finance is seeing the pain. So they are seeing huge overflows. And the way finance is coming back is the classical way finance always responds to such kind of issues: blunt freezes and cuts. Cut everything and then figure out if anything breaks. And from a legal security perspective, also, this has gone into a nightmare because now they have isolated programs. Everybody wants a review, everybody wants a rubber stamp from a legal and security team so that they can push something into production. All these are zombie pilots. And these never dies because there is nobody authorized to kill anything. So that's also a problem. So, for example, one team would have started a program. There is no governance mechanism. Funds keep coming in and it keeps exhausting. There is no mechanism to kill it. We have seen this in the past. We have seen this with shadow ITs early in our journey. We have seen this with SaaS explosion. So all these things we have seen. But there is actually a couple of things which are slightly different in this journey than what we have seen earlier. And I can call it out as three. Number one being the cost dynamics. If you recall, the SaaS world also went to the same model. The cloud went to the same model. But at those times, there were still a control over the cost. The cost was predictable. And since it was predictable per seat basis, it was easy to control. But when you go into AI economics, it is GPUs based, it is token based, it is spiky, it compounds fast. So literally, the organizations don't have a long runway. They have a very, very short runway in months instead of years of runway. The second problem statement is about decision integrity. If shadow IT affected where the data lived, shadow AI is affecting in a much different place. It is affecting where the decisions are getting made. So imagine if unmonitored black box AI gets into production and starts affecting hiring workflows or credit flow process or something which is customer facing. It is not just a compliance risk. The blast radius is much, much higher than what you can imagine. And the regular governance framework and the models which were actually built for managing tool inventory is not equipped enough to manage this. And what is required is a structural fix. And it has to happen in three layers. The layer one is about consolidation. And when we talk about consolidation, that is not just picking a couple of vendors or picking a couple of platforms. It is about a clear-eyed assessment of what the organization is trying to achieve using AI and re-engineer first rather than retrofitting it. Now, that's the first step. And that requires a structured intake process. How do you evaluate AI use cases? How does it fit into the larger picture? What is the feasibility? What is the viability? These are stuff that needs to happen at the first layer. The second layer is moving away from this whole concept of pilots into a structured funded portfolio. So AI initiatives cannot be everybody's baby. Everybody cannot walk up to the CEO's desk and ask for funding. In AI initiatives needs to have an owner, a business case, a defined lifecycle stages, and decision gates. Either kill it or scale it or pivot it. So unless these are there, it becomes a wild, wild waste again. And once you define that, you have to think about actual AI FinOps being the center of it, so that it's just not a financial overlay. And the third part of it is actual heavy lifting, that is moving the AI governance into the life cycle. Currently, it's a rubber stamp. It's kind of an approval layer over the top with top heavy executives. We have to move governance into the products, platforms, and pipeline itself. We need to push automated checks, templates, artifacts, and the defined gates so that before it reaches the community, the structural work is almost kind of done. So, in a nutshell, if a CIO is starting tomorrow, what's that he can do or she can do? My recommendation is start with a rapid discovery and amnesty. Announce, scan your network, scan your expense logs, and announce a no-fault disclosure window. Unless teams disclose what they've been building, you cannot go on what is already built. So you need to build that. And then announce an org-wide freeze. When I say freeze is not ending anything, freeze is not stopping anything. It is freezing proliferation and not innovation. So AI work, experimentation can happen in the domains you define, in the platforms that you designate, and not all over the place. And the third level, harden those decisions, harden those platforms, move into a proper product portfolio model, which has proper intake, stage gates, introduce cost controls, concepts like quotas, hard or soft budget caps, throttling, and eventually at a governance level. So all these things will result in one thing. The sanctioned path will become easier than ungoverned, non-sanctioned path. And once it happens, shadow AI becomes unattractive to the users. It is easier to go the sanctioned path than the ungoverned, unsanctioned path.
Yes.
So anything which is sanctioned, those pilots earn their way into production, and the others die cheaply and wither away. So this is why recommendation to the CIOs would be.
Yeah. So that you actually end up with less friction going the sanctioned route than the other way around.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. It's a very comprehensive answer. That really is top to bottom. And I suppose something I know that's obviously related back to that from speaking with you both before is that you feel that the underlying data work maybe sometimes doesn't get the airtime that it deserves. The provenance, the lineage, the semantic layer is actually turning out to be a much bigger pain point for AI than it would have been for say analytics. I'm curious, why is it that AI breaks things that analytics didn't? And if an enterprise hasn't started with that already, where would they start on that?
Actually, good question, Matt. It's a classical iceberg situation. What we see above the waterline is much smaller compared to what lies underneath the waterline when it comes to data. And I've been using this line often with my customers, and I think it captures the whole conundrum well. The analytics era had a human in the loop who silently fixed the data. AI doesn't have that. And that is the crux of the problem. So if you take a traditional BI stack, the analyst who built the dashboard knew exactly that customer meant something in CRM system. It had a different color in the billing system. It had a different hue in another system. So she knew how to navigate that. Number one. She knew that revenue figure had a 1 week lag. So if I start popping up the revenue figure, I need to account for a 1 week's lag. Otherwise, my numbers may not be right. She knew that it is incorrect to compare, let's say, Q3 numbers for this year with a Q3 number 5 years back because the methodology changed. Now, none of these nuances are captured anywhere. Usually, it is captured as some notes in some SQL scripts or notes in footnotes as in some slide deck. Nobody reads that. But since there was always a human being mediating these decisions between, it was easy to navigate. Now, once you have AI as a mediator, we are taking away that human element from that. So what happens is that the tribal knowledge that analysts spend over the years building up, that's lost. So every ambiguity that the human used to resolve now surfaces as a wrong answer or as a hallucination, or even worst case in case of a legal or a regulatory aspect as a critical legal exposure. So this is a classical problem. And I see this showing up in 3 specific places. The first one we all discussed is semantics. What is counted? So in analytics, what is counted as an active user, for example, or as a churn customer? That could be inconsistent between the the systems. It could be something in the billing system, it could be something in the mediation system, but it was okay because the human beings who operated the system knew the differences and the deviation and managed it. But the moment you put an AI layer on the top of it, the system has to pick one definition and apply it uniformly across. So if organizations have a semantic layer as tribal knowledge, then actually we have a problem of industrialized inconsistency. This is a classical problem. The second layer where the problem is on provenance and lineage. So if you look at all the responsible AI frameworks that is being launched, now there is a focus on data governance. Now, every organization has to be very clear and has to have documented evidences on where the data came from and how it was transformed and how the decisions were made for training their AI systems. Now, my experience, most of the organization can do it for one or two data sets, but for a very large organization with thousands of data sources and data sets, it's practically impossible. This is not a gap. This is a showstopper. And the third area is context sensitivity. So earlier analytical systems, they were always backward looking. It answered specific questions. Whereas modern AI systems is expected to synthesize, to recommend, and to act. So which basically means inconsistencies in source data is not just reducing the trust in the report. It is actually propagating into decisions. So these are three areas where it actually becomes showstoppers for organizations. Now, when we go back, the moment CIO or a CDO recognizes this, their first response is, let me fix my data estate first, and then I will start my AI. Now, I would warn there, because that is a classical grand bridge to nowhere. It would be a multi-year program which will never get solved. So my recommendation would be, take one domain. Take a domain which is the most critical one for you from a business perspective that gives the maximum returns. Then can build your data lineage, your taxonomy, your provenance, and your semantic layer as core infrastructure. Fund it as the same way that you fund a core platform in those domains. Once you get it right in one domain, then you have a repeatable model. You have a repeatable pattern. You have a demonstrated business case, and then you have an internal team which can take it and start shifting to multiple domains. This is what we have started doing it in practice. And that's a recommendation that I would have for the CIOs and CDOs.
Okay. And I mean, Anindya, if I can bring you in the legal exposure side of all of this, I mean, you spent years running IP at Biocon and Infosys, as we said at the beginning, before NALSAR. Where does IP exposure sit in a typical enterprise's AI governance program now? Are teams underestimating it? Are they overestimating it? Or, is it something you think they're actually getting right?
Matt, for someone who has sat on both sides of this, the enterprise is managing IP and now in legal academia, let me, watching closely how frameworks develop, let me try and give you a very, very simple and honest answer. Okay. Most enterprises are doing something that I will be describing as simultaneously overestimating and underestimating.
Okay.
Now that sounds, paradoxical. Now let me try and explain what I mean. They are overestimating the sufficiency of what they have in place. Okay, they may have a board approval, an AI policy, a vendor due diligence questionnaire, some language in some data governance framework. Many teams are looking to this in combination, in isolation, and conclude that their IP exposed is managed. In reality, it is not. What they have in the governance system, if I give an example, is equivalent to a smoke detector in a building that has not yet installed the sprinkler system.
Okay, understood.
It will tell you that something is wrong, but it will not stop the damage going forward. At the same time, when I say they're underestimating specific nature and the scale of exposure. Okay, then the gap is significant and not ignorable anymore. See, the data on shadow Gen AI usage, employee postings, proprietary source, etc., confidential documentation shows the actual service area of AI exposure in most enterprises, which is far, far larger than what their governance programs have been designed to cover. And this is reality. The risk isn't a theoretical anymore. Incident involving leakage, IP leakage through Gen I are happening at some scale. Question is whether the organization needs to fix it by their own monitoring system or through someone else is a question. See, in a classical mode, IP protection is mostly about drawing boundaries. What's ours? What's yours? This is mine. That's not mine. And don't cross the line. Now, AI actually dissolves all those boundaries.
Yeah.
In primarily three ways, and most of the governance programs which are functional haven't usually caught up with those. See, the first is ingestion. Like, for example, when your employee uses a third party, Gen AI tool, even if something which seems to be innocuous, like debugging or making a summary or proprietary information, is potentially entering the model's training and the fine tuning pipeline. Okay, and we do not have the contracts in most enterprise for these AI agreements do not address that sufficiently. Needs a great deal of improvement. They're still not consistently enforceable, and monitoring at the point of ingestion in most organizations is quite, at infancy. The second is generation. When AI produces whatever output comes out, maybe the code, the analysis, the creative content, the ownership has been a question which is unsettled in most jurisdictions. Who owns it? Can it be patented? Does it infringe somebody's model of, on which it was trained? When enterprises have no explicit strategy for this AI generated output, this is a situation of concern. Now, most AI generated outputs do not get classified as assets, which means they have been accumulated as a potential value and at the same time, simultaneously, as a potential liability, and with no clear accounting of either of them.
Yeah.
And finally, the last point I would say is that which I would call a cross-system inconsistency. Enterprise IP is fragmented across system. AI consumes whatever version of a document or a data set or a database it can reach, often without any record of which version it used to generate the output. That breaks the lineage. In a way that it matters the moment you need to defend yourself on ownership, prove non-infringement, or even demonstrate compliance. See, some of the organizations are trying to get it right. They're in minority, mostly in heavily regulated and IP intense sectors. There aren't any training models or training data, prompts, AI outputs as distinct, classified as distinct IP assets, which is governed explicitly. They're treated as a subcategory under some security policy or a subcategory of sensitive data. The practical question I would put to any governance team is that can you produce a connected inventory that can map the models which you are using, what those models are trained on, and what categories of IP do they ingest or generate? And if the answer is no, or no, not really, then your exposure to IP in AI is not under control. The inventory is the basic foundation. All other guardrails, monitoring, output, licensing strategy gets built on top of it.
Yeah, that's I mean, I think that stands out to me speaking to you both and listening to your really detailed answers there on what it is that the enterprises actually struggle with. You both came right back to inventory. Like we started with it and we ended with it, and there's just no escaping the importance of it. And as you say, it's the absolute foundation. If I can move from there, just it seems such an opportunity when I have you both on, to into the subject of the geography of all of this. I think there's just something that you'll both bring a fairly unusual combination of perspectives to. So if I start with the DPDP Act and India's emerging AI policy posture, I mean, that gets less Western coverage than it might deserve. And what's a Western enterprise governance leader most likely to misunderstand about how AI governance is taking shape in India?
Well, see, the misunderstanding I encounter most often with Western governance and AI governance leader is that they feel that it is in India the DP Act is underdeveloped. Okay. Okay, and the leaders think they look at India's AI regulatory posture act because there is an absence of a comprehensive statute. As of India simply hasn't gotten around in writing a version, something similar to the EU Act yet. So that's precisely backward, okay? And getting it wrong has real consequences on how Western enterprises tomorrow would approach their compliance, their partnership, and marketing strategy in India. Let me try and explain what India is actually doing and why the Western frame is missing it. See, India's DP Act of 2023 is the foundation of data and AI governance architecture. Western commentators, scholars have often compared it with, very, very unfavorably to GDPR. Okay, which is more compact. It gives execute. If you look at the DPDA Act, it is far more compact. It gives executive significant discretionary to authority. It does not have the same density of codified obligation. Okay, that is true. All that is true. But the comparison assumes that GDPR style codification is the destination, and in India is a pathway there. Well, that's not how Indian policymakers are thinking and looking at it at all. See, the Indian policymakers have made a deliberate choice for a principle-based, flexible framework, not because it lacks institutional capacity to write those detailed rules, but because it is governing AI as a tool for economic development. And, in addition to that, as a digital public infrastructure, not primarily focused at consumer rights or market regulation problems. What this means to the Western enterprises? Firstly, compliance to EU standards does not automatically ensure compliance in India. And more importantly, it does not mean your operating model will work in India. The data localization provisions, the constant architecture under DPDP, the regulator landscape, and several small ones and other supporting like RBI for fintech, IRDI for insurance, SEBI for the stock market, create a compliance environment which is definitely distinct and not simply a lighter version of what you already know. Assuming that your EU Act readily transfers to India is a mistake, which I have observed regularly. Secondly, the flexibility that makes Indian regulation look underdeveloped is actually a strategic asset for enterprises willing to engage with it properly. The principle based around which means that can be negotiated through engagement, through sectoral regulators, through government bodies, and not only through legal compliance alone. See, relationship, participation in processes, engagement with bodies like MATI matter in a way which simply may not matter how things are done in Brussels.
Mm-hmm.
See, Western enterprises treat India purely as a rules compliance exercise. They miss the complete dimension entirely, in entirety.
Yeah.
Finally, thirdly, the last point is that which I feel most strong about is that Western governments leaders often assume that global AI governance conversation is being written in English in Europe and Washington, and everyone else is trying to catch up with it. Well, India is not trying to catching up with these conventions, which somebody else is leading. It is actively shaping the framework around AI and digital public infrastructure that will make the most for the global south, for this, to 2 to 3 billion people whose digital lives will be governed by such models built on different assumptions when compared to GDPR. If you are a global enterprise and your governance team cannot read India's regulatory posture on its town, you have a significant blind spot. Not just for India, but where the global AI governance conversation is actually going today.
Okay, it's brilliant for us to get that perspective, and I mean, obviously, then to extend the question back to you, Sunil, if I can, the picture from your seat in the US has been moving very fast too. I mean, we're getting two very different views here, and especially whenever we're so used to talking about, as you say, the AI Act. People talk about it as this North Star. You've given us something very different there in India. Sunil, the US picture has shifted significantly, I would say, even in the last 6 months. The Colorado AI Act timeline, federal versus state kind of turf war, I suppose, that's going on there. The federal posture change. From your seat, among the Fortune 500s, has any of that changed how clients are actually building their programs? Or is their operating model holding steady through the noise?
The short answer is the operating model is steady, but the assumptions underneath have shifted. Okay. And the distinction matters a little bit here. Let me give the context first, because sometimes a lot of these conversations get colored by where you read the news. For example, in the last 6 to 9 months, the US AI regulation picture has significantly shifted. So all of us know about Colorado AI Act, one of the most well-formed or fully formed state-level AI regime. We also know about the Texas Responsible AI Act. So if you look at it, the Colorado AI Act, the operative date got pushed from February this year to June 2026. Mm-hmm. And last I read up, there is active pressure to further narrow it. Meanwhile, as all of us know, President Trump's administration has moved to an explicit federal first posture. The December 2025 executive order and the March 2026 National AI Policy Framework signal that Washington wants to be the primary rule setter for AI. And in some sense, if you look at it, it makes sense too, because last we counted, for the work of our second book, we were counting the number of AI-related legislative attempts that are there in different states in US. Not exactly a comprehensive AI law. And when we counted, it was hovering around 900. This is 900 legislative pieces are being discussed, drafted in some various level. So this can actually get into a legislative quagmire, and it may not be the best for the nation and for the industry itself. So From Washington's perspective, they are actively looking at preempting the state laws that conflicts with their position. So the signal to Fortune 500s from Washington is treat us as the main rule setter, but expect some federal preemption. But there is going to be a transition period also where the state laws will still be valid. The court system and the Congress and the Senate has to rule on it. The court system has to weigh out. It will be some time before the preemption completely takes into picture. But in practice, and I want to be specific here, the actual behavior in governance program is more interesting than the headlines. And I see three adjustments, not a rebuild. The first shift that is happening is for Colorado first to a federal first design. A lot of companies that I talk to, they had built their early AI governance frameworks around the Colorado requirements. Colorado fashioned it very much on EU AI Act, so it had high risk categories, significant document obligations for consequential decisions, impact assessments, thresholds, etc. Now, those corporates have not thrown the baby out with the bathwater. They have taken the frameworks and repointed it. Now they are mapping it to the anticipated federal frameworks and some of the existing sectorial rules. Today, the successful companies are treating Colorado more as a stress test than as a design template. And in my opinion, that is actually a fairly elegant pivot. The second move is the leading corporates are looking forward to jurisdiction agnostic artifacts. So if you look at it, if you take out all the conversations and the news articles around it, in principle, Colorado Act and the federal framework converge on same underlying principles. It is risk management, documentation, transparency, and human oversight. So a lot of my customers are investigating into generic reusable governance artifacts, generic model inventories, impact assessments, and evidences, etc. Their objective is to arrive at documentation that can survive whatever statutory framework that would eventually be landed on.
Yeah.
So I would say it is preemption savvy. And the third part is where they are looking from a legal perspective. They have the legal teams have reoriented themselves towards the federal agencies like the FTC, the DOJ, and those are the primary horizon for AI Council. The state developments are treated more as a litigation risk and more as a lobbying target than as compliance baselines. And this is important for us because if you look at it, those corporates who have actually navigated this are the ones who are well poised to succeed when there is going to be a negotiated position on the regulation as we go forward in this conversation.
Okay, gotcha. And I mean, I suppose the other thing then, really, just to close that off, and if I can ask you this one quite quickly, is if we look across India, if we look across the US, if we look across the EU, is there anything that you see as being genuinely universal in AI governance? You have given quite different answers there and quite different perspectives, but what are the principles or the practices that hold regardless of jurisdiction?
Well, Matt, there is a very reassuring version of this answer. Okay, that is, everyone agrees to the same principles.
Mm-hmm.
So multinational governance is mostly implementation details. And if I give you a little more details on it,
yeah,
the principles are genuinely universal. Every major jurisdiction converges on the same vocabulary, which is like, for example, human-centric values, safety, accountability, transparency, fairness, data governance. Now, these aren't just, theoretical or rhetorical convergences. They have been institutionalized through OECD, AI principles, G7 commitments, the Council of European AI conventions, and various other responsible AI frameworks of major technology firms. So, so globally, the floor exists. The question is what sits above it, and that's where regions diverge.
Yeah.
India, on the other hand, has most likely, which, as again I will repeat, that has been misread in certain cases. India has DPDP Act as a data protection foundation, more compact than GDPR, with significant executive discretions, but a genuine statutory baseline. What India deliberately does not have is a comprehensive statute. Now, this is not to be looked upon as a gap. It is a choice. India is governing AI as an instrument of development, not primarily as a consumer protection problem. The digital public infrastructure model, or even the Aadhaar or the UPI, the account aggregators framework, means that the state is actually an infrastructure provider, not just a regulator. Universal principles are present, okay? But the institutional logic and the relationship between the state, the market, and the citizen are structured differently.
Yeah, it's coming from a very different position.
A multinational that maps EU Act readiness into India and assume that a job is done is making a significant, analytical error. Sunil, you would like to add something?
Yeah. See, I can actually talk about the operational version of it. I see that very regularly in the Fortune 500 governance programs.
Yeah.
And Dr. Sarkar mentioned a little bit about this philosophical angle it is coming from. So if you look at, Matt, you're a European, so you can appreciate it better. So if you look at the European regulations, it comes from an inherent belief system that ultimate power should not be with anybody, including the state. So it always takes a risk-based approach, and that's the way EU AI Act has been designed. Now, India, on the other hand, came out of colonialism, had its ill effects. So state is an active participant in the developmental activities. So their approach is different. If you look at US, it adds a third model to it. US inherently believes the role of government to be as minimal as possible. Living in US, you will understand that the clamor is lesser government, nor more government, not more government. So the federal posturing is always about innovation first, light touch, and enforce through existing consumer protection and civil rights acts, etc. So if you look at it, the regulations in US are fragmented, sectoral, and largely exposed against ex ante that Dr. Sarkar mentioned. Now, what does it mean to a multinational? My advice would be to break it into two tiers. The first is you build once and run everywhere. These are the common principles Anindya mentioned about accountability, transparency, fairness, oversight, governance. These can actually translate to jurisdiction agnostic practices. You can actually have model inventories, risk-tired use case classifications, impact assessments, documentation standards, etc. So my recommendation is build to EU AI Act standards. That's the most demanding codified regime. So build to that standard, you have covered the global floor. But as Anindya mentioned, don't mistake EU compliance for global compliance. It is a floor for universal principles. It is not a floor for region specifics. And the second tier, you focus on market by market. And in this, there are three things that would stand out. For example, I'll take an example. Consent and data architecture. Dr. Sarkar talked about DPDP Act. The consent framework and data localization requirements are entirely different, and they don't map into GDPR compliance. It is intentional because that tags to the requirements of the market and not to a universal principle out there. The same system that is data compliant in Europe may not be data compliant in India. And how does it affect? It affects the way you design your training pipelines, your infrastructure, and your vendor contracts. This, so the successful multinationals are the one which who can navigate this well. They are not the ones with the most comprehensive policy document. They are the ones who have the local governance capacity, the people who can actually understand the regulatory culture of the market than just the text. So that's my two tires for the CIOs who are designing AI governance models for their organizations.
Yeah, yes, it's a question of their agility more than anything else. Then, and it's it's impossible, but there's always the way. Whenever you try to look at what things have in common, we just can't help but get into the interesting side is actually what's different. It's actually what sets them apart. So no, I completely understand why we'd come at it that way. And look, if I slow the pace slightly here, I think if your book went to press in August last year, isn't that right, in 2025? And since then, we've obviously touched on the UAI Act a little there, but even just in the last number of days, we've had the digital omnibus shift. We've had agentic AI moving from what was probably more of an edge case at that time to very much mainstream conversation, and a lot of noise around the Colorado AI Act, as you mentioned, and the shift in the US federal posture. If you look at your four guardrails, are there any fundamental changes, or do the principles still largely hold?
I'll be honest about what surprised me since we went to press. We finished the manuscript on the eve of 2024 Christmas, and then handed it over to a publisher. It took another 8 months for the publisher to actually get it to the press. But what changed drastically during that time was, and which I didn't anticipate, we had covered a little bit about agentic AI frameworks in our book. We never expected it to become mainstream in the next 6 months time frame. The time frame was something that we completely misjudged. So I was having I was surprised that I was having conversations with Fortune 500 CIOs within 5 months of we completing the book into a completely different paradigm. Though we had talked about the principles and policies, we had not gone into depth on what are the operating parameters to it. So if given a chance, we would look at those chapters slightly differently. For example, a chapter that covers technical and operational guardrails, we would have spent more time describing agentic AI specific architecture. The principles are right, don't get me wrong, the principles are right, but we would have spent more about model monitoring, observability, depreciation protocols, etc. We would have spent more time, and we would have made it more concrete, that part of the book. On the regulatory side, you're right. There has been significant shifts that we saw in the last 1 year since we went to press. But we took a conscious decision when we wrote those chapters. We said we are not going to write those chapters around certain statutes or certain acts that are going to come out. Rather, we would keep it doctrinal, and our thought process was it should survive irrespective of where we land. And in fact, the current position of where we are from a regulatory position perspective justifies what we thought at that point in time. In my opinion, the scaffolding around the principles have hardened, but it's still standing. So from my perspective, it is still relevant, is what I would say.
Excellent. Okay. And I mean, the obvious place to go from there is that you're actually both finishing up a follow-up book at the moment. And if I'm right, that argues that regulators globally are actually over-engineering. So if I say there's roughly 5 dimensions that legislators should look at based on that, and that would be better off building the doctrines that already exist than intervening new ones. I hope I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I believe from our previous conversation, that's what you'd say. Without giving the whole game away, what are those 5 dimensions, and what would shift if regulators were to take your approach?
Matt, I would like to quote Saint Francis Sales, bishop from Geneva in, I guess, around the 16th century.
Okay.
He said that, hell is full of good intentions.
Mm-hmm.
hell is full of good intentions. We now call it the theory of unintended consequences. I want to start there because I think it describes precisely that's what's happening to AI regulation globally right now.
Okay.
Okay. The instinct behind the EU Act, the Colorado Act, behind the waves of AI-specific legislation and jurisdiction is, is good. The risks are real. The harms are documentable. But when respect to this genuinely complex technology in the new legal architecture that leads to new definitions, new risk categories, new enforcement bodies, new compliances, new application, and so many other new things. Okay. So the argument Sunil and I would make in the follow-up book is that uh, how much of these require new laws or is it totally unnecessary? Not because, and we feel that having new statutes may be completely unnecessary. Not because AI does not need governance. It does. But because the legal system already has conceptual tools to govern it, the regulators, if willing to extend and clarify the existing doctrine rather than inventing the new machinery. Now, if you look at IP, who owns the model, who owns the tangible data, who owns AI generated output? We have copyright, patent, trademark, and database doctrines already, which needs to a proper clarification and extension, and not really a new IP regime for AI. And now on privacy and data residency, if I look into that, the question is, there are frameworks on to training data, there are models for model outputs to interfaces. Whether we need an entirely new primary statute for AI, we don't think so. There are already tensions in this created by in and around personal data, cross-border flows, and surveillance. But third point is accountability and liability, the third pillar. When an AI system causes harm, who's responsible? It could be product liability, negligence, fiduciary duty. Uh, who is responsible? Now, when the context for the causation is becoming complex, the responsibility is getting distributed. This needs updating in the AI specific characteristics. They don't need to be replaced. The fourth pillar, as we call, is AI sovereignty and fair taxation, which is really one question about economic power, who controls the infrastructure, and on which the AI is running, and where does the value it creates get taxed. No, there are competition law, international tax law questions, the OECD's digital taxation network, antitrust doctrine on platform dominance. These frameworks exist. It's the political will to apply them uh, and not the absence of legal concept. The fifth and the last pillar is economic security and human dignity. Now, this is all about displacement efforts of AI on labor, the integrity of democratic processes, the protection of people for automated decisions. Now, these are the hardest question and most likely to generate new legislation in some areas, in some jurisdiction. But even there, we have labor law, constitutional right framework, consumer protection doctrine, which provide a foundation that targeted extension can be built on. See, the third line is that all five is the same. AI stress exists in doctrine. There is a reasonable amount of AI stresses. The right response is to repair and extend the stressed doctrine, not to replace it with a grand new statute that might itself be stressed in the next wave of capability.
In the fullness of time. Okay. Well, look, we look forward to seeing that and getting your take in full when that comes out. So for now, Anindya and Sunil, I just want to thank you both. That was a really deep conversation. We got into the weeds of all of those topics, and I think it's one that a lot of governance leads are going to want to come back to. For listeners who do want to go deeper, the AI Governance Handbook is available on Amazon and from publisher Springer Nature. And as you've just heard, the follow-up book's in progress, and hopefully we can get you back when that's published too. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please share it with somebody who'll find it useful, and please do leave us a rating whenever you listen. It makes more of a difference than you'd think. Anindya, Sunil, and everyone listening, thank you again from the AI Governance Podcast. Thank you both.
Thank you, Matt. It was
Thanks,
great talking.
Matt. It was great talking to you.
Thank you.